Okay, we're ready.
Okay, should I start or should it
Yeah, yeah, start.
okay. All right. Every year we gather together on Zoom or in person to commemorate the Yahrzeit of my father's Zatzal. Most of us were Talmidim of his, some were Talmidim of Talmidim, but even those that were Talmidim of Talmidim are also Talmidim, are students. But this year is altogether different than the previous years because of the tragic circumstances that have taken place in Eretz Yisrael. Last year, Shmini Atzeres, Simchas Torah. And I've been troubled almost for the duration of the whole year. I know we can't understand, even though there are those that like to make speeches, we can't understand why. My uncle would always say that in regard to Parah Adumah, and that, of course, is reflective of, of death in general, which Parah Adumah is associated with, of Tahara from contact with the dead. That we can't understand why. We can't understand how, from a religious perspective, at least in regard to Parah Adumah, but we could understand the what. And the what is the message that I heard, that I sensed. And that might be a different message than other people sensed. But I just want to share what my thoughts might have been. And when one looks at the Haftorahs, especially in Chutz La'aretz, of the Yomim Tovim and Shabbos Chalamoed of Sukkot, two topics stand out. One is Milchemes Gog Magog, the war, the final war, the war that will take place preceding the coming of the Mashiach, preceding the end of days, and also the dedication of the Beis Hamikdash in the time of Shlomo HaMelech. And both the dedication of the Beis Hamikdash and the time of Shlomo HaMelech took place in Tishrei, took place during Sukkot. And the Rishonim seem to have had a source that Milchemes, and there is implication in the Navi for it, that Milchemes Gog Magog will take place in the time of Sukkot as well. And I want to understand the message of this connection. Now, it's also, I heard mentioned in the name of the Gra. I never saw it inside, but the Gra, it's quoted in the name of the Gra, that the Milchemes Gog Magog will take place on Hoshana Rabbah. Hoshana Rabbah is the last day of Sukkot, the day before Shmini Atzeres. I want to understand what is the significance and to the fact that the Milchemes Gog Magog will take place on Sukkot and specifically on the Shana Rabbah. Now it's brought down that on the Shana Rabbah, in In Chutz La'aretz, it's somewhat hard to observe this, but in Hashan Rabbah, when a person steps out of the sukkah, he has to do something, move the schach, whatever it is, to show that he has no intention of using the schach, using the sukkah again for the mitzvah of sukkah. Reb Chaim, in the shiurim of my uncle's Hatzal, it's brought down that Reb Chaim, together with his sons, on Shmini Atzeres, because they sat in the sukkah on Shmini Atzeres, when they left the sukkah for the last time, I think I saw brought down that they would turn over the table. But the question is, why is this necessary? Why is it important to make a sign that shows that it's a demonstration that we have finished using the sukkah? Why isn't it enough just to walk out of the sukkah? Now, obviously, when somebody might come back into the sukkah, needs to use it, perhaps then there is a reason for it. But this halacha seems to apply even in other situations as well. Now, the Zohar tells us that the three regalim correspond with the three Yavos. Pesach with Avram, and it's very easy to understand why Pesach corresponds with Avram. Avram is understood to be the first of the Jewish people, and Yetzias Mitzrayim, the exodus from Egypt, is Goy Mikarev Goy. It's the beginning of the establishing of the Jewish people as a nation, separating themselves from the Egyptians and to a larger degree from the rest of the world as well. Yitzchak is identified according to the Zohar with Shavuos, and that also is easy to understand. First of all, the binding of Yitzchak to the altar can be identified with the Naseh v'Nishma. I accept and I will listen. Acceptance is binding. When Naseh comes before Nishma, it's a psychological binding. And more than that, we know, according to Chazal, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu was Kaf Aleihem Har Kegigis. God raised Har Sinai over them and said, "Im tekablu es Torah mutav." If you accept the Torah, good. If lav sham tehek v'raschem. And as the Maharal explains, the Jewish people voluntarily, with love, accepted the Torah. But in addition, the mountain was held over them. Their acceptance of the Torah wasn't just because the mountain was held over them, but they had to know that even though they wanted to accept the Torah and they accepted it voluntarily, nevertheless, acceptance of the Torah is something that they had to do. So that too is Alei Yitzchak. When he was put on the Akedah, he voluntarily went on the Akedah. He stuck his neck out. But Zabein Hanekad, the schus of his giving himself over as a korban. And this, to a certain degree, is the Naseh v'Nishma as well. And the Kaf Aleim Har Kegigis, it was voluntary, but they knew, but nevertheless they had to be bound. And Yaakov corresponds with Sukkah. The Zohar mentions that because he called the place Sukkos. So, but what's the idea behind it? Why is Yaakov? How does Yaakov symbolize the holiday of Sukkot? Now, it's interesting. At what point does Abraham become an Av of Klal Yisrael? Abraham becomes an Av, a patriarch in the fullest sense of Klal Yisrael at the time of the Bris Milah. At the time that his name is changed from Avram to Avraham. Av Hamon Goyim Nisaticha. Yitzchak is born an Av of Klal Yisrael. Ki v'Yitzchak yikara l'chazara. Avram was told before Yitzchak was actually born. When does Yitzchak assume that role as a father of Klal Yisrael? It could be suggested after Leah, after Sarah passes away. In a sense, Avram finishes his role to a certain degree as the Av of Klal Yisrael. Or it could be suggested that Yitzchak assumes the role of the Av of Klal Yisrael at the time that he marries Rivka. But he's an Av of Klal Yisrael. Both Avram and Yitzchak never leaves Eretz Yisrael. Avram leaves from the time he becomes an Av of Klal Yisrael, from the time his name is changed from Avram to Avram, he never leaves Eretz Yisrael. Yaakov, there are all kinds of different opinions that could be suggested as to what point Yaakov becomes an Av of Klal Yisrael. It's true, he is designated to become an Av of Klal Yisrael when Yitzchak told him, Yitein lecha es birchas Avraham. But it's more likely that he became an Av of Klal Yisrael after he received the name Yisrael. Ki sarisa im Elokim ve'imanoshim batuchal. According to Targum Onkelos, Sarisa is Elokim, it's Kadosh. You became, the way Targum Onkelos explains it, you became a Sar. You became an officer. Before God, Kod Melakim, Ve'imman Shaya, and with people. Become a Sar, an officer. That means to assume the role of being an Av of Klal Yisrael. So, but Yaakov is the only one who, after being an Av of Klal Yisrael, after not only being designated as an Av, but actually assuming the role as an Av of Klal Yisrael, of the Jewish people, as the patriarch of the Jewish people, that leaves Eretz Yisrael. He needed special permission. So, but he leaves Eretz Yisrael, he goes down to Egypt. Earlier, of course, he went to Paddan Aram. Okay, his status at that point, he was already designated as an Av of Klal Yisrael, but not yet. It's entering that position as an Av of Klal Yisrael. And also we find very interesting. So in a sense, Yaakov is, in a sense, identified as an Av of Klal Yisrael, is identified with the Jews of both Chutz La'aretz and Eretz Yisrael. Abraham, when he becomes an Av, he stays in Eretz Yisrael. Yitzchak always stays in Eretz Yisrael. Yaakov is identified with both the Jews of Eretz Yisrael as well as the Jews of Chutz La'aretz. And Yaakov is married to two wives, Rachel and Leah. Rachel is buried b'derech. Why? She's buried at the road. Because when the Jewish people are going to Golus, because of the Musa Adon. They'll stop off at the grave of Rachel, and they will be mispalel there. And Rachel will beseech HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and will cry over the fate of her descendants. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu will tell her, don't cry. Mini kolech mi bechi v'nayich midima. Yei sochar lefuosech. V'shavu banim l'gvulam. So Rachel is the mother of the Jews. Rachel is the mother of the Jews of Chutz La'aretz. The Jews of Chutz La'aretz. Leah is buried in the Maras HaMachpelah. Leah is the mother of the Jews of Eretz Yisrael. Now, I think when you take a look at the holiday of Sukkot, what is the holiday of Sukkot? What does it commemorate? It commemorates the Jewish people tracking through the Midbar. L'man yedu doroseichem ki basukos hashafti es b'nei Yisrael me'eretz Mitzrayim. In a sense, it's reminiscent, I think, of the Jewish people traveling through Chutz La'aretz, from country to country, from place to place. They're in one place. They might even achieve some sense of stability, but immediately something happens. There's oppression, and they have to run and escape to another place. Just as the Jews in the Midbar went from place to place. And then, if the sukkah represents the Jewish people going through the Midbar, what does Shmini Atzeres represent? When we go from our temporary dwelling to our permanent dwelling, it represents the Jewish people going to Eretz Yisrael. Chutz La'aretz is a temporary dwelling because every spot we are in Chutz La'aretz is temporary. And more than that, even if we would have been only in one spot, it's our temporary dwelling because the only permanent dwelling for the Jewish people is Eretz Yisrael. We go from Dira Roi, from a temporary dwelling into a permanent dwelling. Shmini Atzeres represents the Jewish people entering Eretz Yisrael. And it's very interesting. When you look at the Karbanos of Sukkot, as opposed to the Karbanos of Pesach, every day, the Karban, the sacrifice, the Musaf sacrifice, is a different sacrifice. One less par every day. Pesach, it's the same Karban every day. And I think, because Sukkot, even though the Jewish people leaving Egypt was outside of Eretz Yisrael, but it doesn't represent the Jews of Chutz La'aretz. It represents the Jewish people being free. But tracking through the Midbar, going from place to place, being chased from place to place, which was a lot of the Jewish people in Chutz La'aretz, is reminiscent of the Jewish people in going through the Midbar. And I think the situation in Chutz La'aretz is constantly changing. And each time we need another salvation. Avram Avinu at the time of the Kedah, he said to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Medrash tells us, I know that the Jewish people are going to encounter difficult circumstances, but tein revach bein tzara l'tzara. Give some space in between one Sarah and the other. That's the most that we can hope from the Chutz La'aretz. And sometimes, look what happened in Gerish Sfarad. There was no Revach ben Sarah Litzara. They were killed from one country to another. There was a demand for their changing religions, conversion by the church at the threat of death. That constantly was a threat over the neck of the Jew. In those days, there wasn't even Revach ben Sarah Litzara. So, Chutz La'aretz, and each time we need a different salvation. The situation changes from day to day. And history in Chutz La'aretz, especially in Chutz La'aretz, changes from day to day. And as time moves on, it changes faster and faster and faster. And each day presents its own challenges. And even though so Shmini Atzeres represents that Yehoshua entering Eretz Yisrael with the Jewish people. But even though the Jews entered Eretz Yisrael at the time of Yehoshua, they did not completely finish their task of going through the Midbar, of traveling to Eretz Yisrael, until the building of the Beis HaMikdash, the dedication of the Beis HaMikdash in the time of Shlomo HaMelech. The Brisker Rav, in his letters, it's actually a letter to my uncle at the back of the Sefer. He says, my uncle had suggested a little different approach, but he said that the Kele HaMishkan, that were now, the Kele Beis HaMikdash that were taken to the Beis HaMikdash, had to be carried to the Beis HaMikdash, bekataf, on the shoulders, just as they were carried in the Midbar on the shoulders. Even though after that, only the Ahron had to be carried bekataf. In other words, the trip through the desert from a certain perspective was not completed when Yehoshua entered Eretz Yisrael, but it was only completed with the Binyan Beis HaMikdash. And we know, the Ramban says, that what was the purpose of the Mishkan? The purpose of the Mishkan was to serve as a vehicle to transfer Kedushas Har Sinai, to transfer the sanctity of Har Sinai to Yerushalayim. So the tracking through the Midbar on one hand was to bring the Jewish people to Eretz Yisrael, to establish that as their homeland. On the other hand, it was to establish not just a home for them, but a home for HaKadosh Baruch Hu as well. And that was accomplished only at the time of the Binyan Beis HaMikdash, in the time of Shlomo HaMelech. Now, Hoshana Rabbah is the end, represents in a sense, the end of the Golus. Shmini Atzeres commemorates the Jewish people entering the permanent dwelling, Eretz Yisrael. And Milchemes Gog uMagog, that represents the end of Golus also. I think that perhaps the gross thought could be understood from that perspective. that, in a sense, the end of Golus is identified with the Milchemes Gog and Magog, and consequently is identified with Hoshana Rabbah. And perhaps that's the reason that we have to, in a sense, make a sign that this is the end of Sukkah. This is the end of Golus. In other words, it's not enough to enter Eretz Yisrael. We have to end Golus also. So that's the reason why you have to make a sign, moving the schach, whatever it is, on Hoshana Rabbah, to demonstrate this is the end of the mitzvah of Sukkah that represents the Jewish people traversing the Midbar. And it shows our determination to end the Golus. But to a certain degree, on a spiritual level, the Golus continued even after the Jews entered Eretz Yisrael. Because, in a sense, there were two trips. The trip was to enter Eretz Yisrael to build a home for the Jewish people, but also to build a house for HaKadosh Baruch Hu, a home for HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which was the Beis HaMikdash. And I think these two trips represent two challenges for the Jewish people. One is the physical welfare of the Jewish people. And that's represented by the making Eretz Yisrael, the homeland of the Jewish people. And to a certain degree, that was accomplished by Yehoshua. But we also have to make a spiritual home for HaKadosh Baruch Hu should be v'asuli mikdash v'shachanti b'socham in a permanent manner. Just as we look forward to the time when Eretz Yisrael will be the homeland of the Jewish people in a permanent manner. And throughout the generations, the Rabbanim, the Jewish leadership of the towns, they had a double task. One task was the welfare of the people, to deal with the poverty of the people, to deal with the people who encounter difficulties. Sometimes it was difficulties from anti-Semitism. Sometimes it was difficulties, personal difficulties. Sometimes it was tragedies. Sometimes it was pogroms, it was fires that destroyed their homes. That was one challenge that faced the Rabbanim of the different towns in Golus, Jewish leadership in Golus. But of course, the Rabbanim also had the challenge, the spiritual challenge, as represented by the building of the Beis HaMikdash, that the Jewish people should be able to feel close to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And unfortunately, as time has passed, you found Jewish leaders that dedicated themselves primarily only to one task, or primarily to the other task. But there were unique individuals that dedicate themselves to both tasks, to complete that golus, that tracking through the midbar, to come to figuratively to take care of the welfare of the Jewish people, to help the sick, to help the impoverished, and there were so many impoverished, to help in time of tragedy, and at the same time to focus on their religious commitment, on their devotion to Torah. And the one that comes to mind the most is Reb Chaim. There was no Baal Chesed like Reb Chaim. At the same time, there was no greater teacher of Torah that inspired the people, that inspired Torah learning for generations like Reb Chaim. And my father, Zatzal, had that same approach. If somebody was in trouble, even if it was people that harmed them, when people got in trouble with the government, people who worked against my father, people who tried to get my father kicked out of Chicago, my father would sacrifice himself to the point of becoming sick, going to Washington to plead on their behalf. When people didn't have a house to live because they had handicapped children. And the children would make noise or whatever it was. My father would go from house to house to raise money, to buy them an apartment. Even in New York, my mother told me shortly after they were married, on Yom Kippur Eve, my father heard about a certain lady that had to be placed in a mental hospital. And in those days, insurance didn't cover it. So my father, Yom Kippur Eve, walked from shul to shul to get commitments from people, to give money that this lady should receive the medical attention she needed. I remember there was a case. I was a young boy at the time, a child in Eretz Yisrael, who either was born without legs or legs were taken off in an operation, and they needed to get artificial legs for the child. Someone that my father didn't know altogether, had no connection with them. But he went to raise the money for them. And at a time when no one really cared about a mentally handicapped, before the government programs got involved, my father almost stood alone in trying to help starting schools. This is in New York when I was a young boy. And I remember my mother at that time became the president of the Manhattan Women's Group for this institution, because it would provide Jewish education, the limited Jewish education. But my father, that limited Jewish education was more important than the kollel educations, because that meant that these children will remain Jewish. No one else was involved. And there are so many stories, and I can't go into all of them. My father almost never revealed it. Sometimes stories I found out even after he passed away, his concern for Talmidim. He bringing food to Talmidim that were in hospitals. I remember a case where a boy in New York, boy in the high school in Yeshiva University, forgot his lunch. And the mother of the boy called my mother, asked what should she do. So my father immediately went over to the house there to pick up the lunch of the boy in the high school. And he walked into the high school class where the boy was. And of course, the Rebbe of the high school class was startled. He was totally startled. He was honored. He stood up. All the boys stood up. And my father said, I brought the lunch for this boy. The Rebbe couldn't believe his ears. I was told that he gave such a speech afterwards. For my father, it's not only the chesed that he did, but observing him and trying to observe him. And it wasn't easy to observe him because he didn't talk about it. We could learn what chesed really meant. Reb Chaim Moshe once said that he saw the chesed of Reb Chaim once when he opened up the shutters of the window to see if Reb Chaim was awake. And Reb Chaim was taking care of two little children, feeding them. Children that weren't even his. It was 2:00 in the morning. The mother left them in front of the door because she didn't have food to feed them. My father was behind shutters also. Sometimes I and other individuals might have been able to look through those shutters and to see some of the acts of chesed. But we have to make that part of us that was taking care of the welfare of people. But when it came to anything to do with the Masorah, the strong stand my father took, the observance of Yashan, my father restored a mitzvah of the Torah. Okay, it's a machlokas rishonim. But where everybody goes crazy over strange minhagim, it's not only that they weren't receptive initially, but he was actually fought about it. They turned non-observance of Chadash into a chumrah. It's an Isur of Gaiva, they said, to observe Yashan. Until their children, after going to Eretz Yisrael, started observing. V'heshiv leivavos albanim. Then, of course, it became accepted. Why is it? Because my father had Yiras Shamayim, fear of heaven, not fear of the community. They were motivated by fear of the community, by concern of being part of the community. My father worked for the community, but his commitment was to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. His commitment was to the Torah. I think this is the idea of Sukkot. And in a sense, the Jews, very often we think that we're no longer in Gullus because we can move to Eretz Yisrael. The Gullus continues. I'm not arguing, there's no question that Eretz Yisrael was something that amazing for Klal Yisrael. It put us on the road of Gula. It put us on the road of Gula. My father would say, it offers us an opportunity for a Gula. And it's because my father saw it as an opportunity for Gula. Therefore, when he saw events taking place that endangered the future of the Jewish people in Eretz Israel, in spite of the abuse that he received, he got sick. When he saw them giving away territories, not because so much because Jewish people have to own all of Eretz Yisrael. Of course, that's important. But he saw that that will serve as an inducement for terrorism, because they see that they're rewarded time and time again. He was concerned about the future of the Jewish people, because he saw the Jewish people coming back to Eretz Yisrael as the road to Gula, as an opportunity to Gula. It was Vayaris Hamokom Meiracho. He didn't just think of today. He thought of tomorrow also. I remember years ago when the Lubavitcher Rebbe passed away, and I was invited to give a hesped in Florida, Miami, for the Lubavitcher community. And I stayed over in the house of one of the Lubavitcher shlichim, an elderly person. One time, he was like the shliach of the Rebbe at Yeshiva University. He was involved with the students there. And then he went down to Florida, and he said to me, this was just after the Rebbe passed away, he says, the only one left is your father. Because my father, he understood the future. At the time, my father took stands in a lot of these positions, whether it was Yashan, whether it was about Eretz Yisrael. He was fought. People thought it wasn't important. But in retrospect, when we look back today, how correct was he? Why was it? Because my father was concerned only about Torah and only about Klal Yisrael. And even where he had to take a stand that he knew would affect him in a negative manner, where people will get together and work against him and cause him all kinds of abuse, he did it anyway. My father recognized the two trips through the Midbar that Sukkot represents: the establishment of a home for Klal Yisrael, and the taking care of the welfare of the Jewish people, and at the same time, the establishment of a home for HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Beis HaMikdash, Va'asuli Mikdash Shechanti B'Socham, in a permanent manner. And we, his Talmidim and the Talmidim of his Talmidim, have to learn not only from his Shiurim, which of course is very, very important, but we have to learn from his example. And we have to use his example to dedicate ourselves to combining these two tasks of perpetuating the trip of establishing a home for the Jewish people, being concerned about the welfare of the Jewish people everywhere, and at the same time to be concerned about establishing a home for HaKadosh Baruch Hu in the midst of the residents of the Jewish people. Va'asuli mikdash v'shachanti b'socha.
Okay, in a minute, we'll hear from Rav Chaim Soloveichik, live from Harnof, and then after that from Rav Moshe Kletenik from Seattle. But Rebbe, I have here a speech that Rav Ahron had given at a parlor meeting for Maimonides Institute for Jewish retarded children about Bikurim. It's a page and a half. Can I read it right now?
Certainly.
The third chapter of the Mishnah of Tractate Bikurim preserves a detailed and fascinating description of the ceremony involved in the fulfillment of the religious obligation of bringing the first fruits to Jerusalem as an offering to God in the temple. The wealthy brought their first fruits in baskets of silver and gold, and the poor in wicker baskets. And as they approached Jerusalem, the dignitaries and other officials of the city went forth to meet them. And they were ushered into Jerusalem, and streets were lined by the urban dwellers, the artisans, and the craftsmen who greeted them with the words, "Our brethren from such and such a place, you are welcome here. It is my high honor and extreme privilege to greet you with the same greeting. It appears to me that there is a parallelism between that magnanimity of character manifested by the pilgrims who brought the first fruit to the temple, and the noble as well as lofty gesture manifested by your participation in the significant gathering, which was called for the purpose of familiarizing ourselves with the charitable and humanitarian work of the Maimonides Institute for Jewish Retarded Children. According to the Talmud, there is no minimum quantity which must be given as bikurim. Bikurim is included among the items that have no limits, ein lahem shiur. One could observe the mitzvah by giving anything at all. One cluster of grapes, a few olives or dates were sufficient for an entire orchard. One may wonder why the bringing of the first ripe fruits received so much recognition and kindled the imagination of everyone to such an extent that all the craftsmen and dignitaries of Jerusalem interrupted their work in order to greet the pilgrims. The answer is very simple. The tribute paid to the pilgrim bringing the first fruits is not based upon the quantity given, but rather upon the manner and circumstances in which it is given. Picture the farmer tilling his land, pruning his trees, trying to keep the beetles and insects from ruining his crops, fighting the frost at night by making fires to warm the trees. Finally, after a season of anxiety and toil, he beholds the first ripe fruit. There is abundance of joy and happiness in his heart. He would like to eat it all up together with his wife and children. But he does not do it, for at least part of the first ripe fruits belong to God. So he takes a little string, ties it to that fruit, and calls it bikurim. He then takes it to Jerusalem, where the pilgrim dedicates the first fruits of God, and where tribute is paid to him for the loftiness of character. And as I mentioned before, your participation in this gathering now manifests a similar trait of character. We too are all mothers of young children who are the first ripe fruits of ours. We have to be grateful to God that our children have been endowed with ripeness, with normalcy, and adaptability. Our time, our energies, our talents, our wealth, and our efforts are imminently and inseparably intertwined with the happiness and education of our first ripe fruits. Any quantity of money given by you for the Maimonides Institute, any effort undertaken by you towards the implementation of the aims to which the Maimonides Institute is dedicated, is at the expense of our children. However, it is our sacred duty as human beings, as Jews, and as young mothers to dedicate at least a small, tiny fraction of the time and money belonging to our bikurim, our first ripe fruits, for the purpose of ameliorating the tragic lot of the most unfortunate children of God. As human beings, it is our duty to extend kindliness and sympathy for the unfortunate and suffering. As Jews, it is our foremost obligation to emulate our Creator, who is both compassionate and generous. According to Maimonides, no cause is more commendable than injecting joy into the hearts of the unfortunate. As Maimonides says, there is no greater or sublime joy than the gladdening of hearts of the poor, the orphan, the widows, and the stranger. For one who gladdens the heart of these unfortunates can be compared to the Shekhinah, as it is written, to revive the spirit of the humble and to revive the heart of the contrite ones. And finally, as mothers, we have to manifest our gratitude to Almighty God, who endowed our children with normalcy and adjustability to life by endeavoring to ameliorate the lot of those unfortunate mothers who have not been blessed with the blessing of normal children. So that was from the early 60s, I think. But it
Yes.
wasn't dated in his in the book where this was copied from his handwriting.
Yeah. That's before you had government programs.
Okay, so next we're going to go to Yerushalayim. And Baruch, if you could unmute for Reb Chaim to speak, and if he could be close to the computer so we could hear him well, please. Rabbi, I'm going to mute you.
Okay.
Please don't take it personally.
I'm not.
Let me find you here. We want to thank Murray for every year hosting in his sukkah the gathering in Harnof. And then after that, we'll here for Moshe Kletenik in Seattle. But as we wait for Harnof.
Goes in? Why not? Get it before. What is that? Oh, these lights.
You want to say something just so we can make sure we can hear you?
Okay, do you hear me?
Yeah.
Great. So excited.
Yeah, I do not want this one. They should be off. This set. This here. Which one? Okay, let's see how we feel. Better.
Okay, we're it's fine from our end here.
Okay, is this okay? I think that's good.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. I think
I look great, no? Okay, I'd like to thank everyone for coming. I just want to mention that I forgot how many years today. This year is the 23rd Yahrzeit. As a matter of fact, someone will talk to me. The night says to me, so I hear it's your father's 25th Yahrzeit. So I said, no, 23rd. So he said he saw in the Torah Tidbits 25th. So I said, I didn't see the Torah Tidbits. I happen to know that my father passed away after 9/11. So you know, it's like, I can always I checked today. Don't worry, that's 23. I checked. Okay, no problem. I checked. That being said, you know, commemorating a Yahrzeit, especially when you have younger children in Eretz Yisrael and Chol Hamoed, can be a bit challenging. Because in Eretz Yisrael and Chol Hamoed, everyone's always going on Piyulim. And usually, depending on the year, we would leave in the early afternoon. And it was never a problem to find a minyan, because wherever you go in Eretz Yisrael, who's an Itzil, everyone went to daven mincha. There was one year, I'm not sure, it was the 10th year or 11th year site near Park Herzliya, and couldn't find a minyan all over the park. It was like, I mean, I wasn't really that concerned, because you just jump in the car and go to Bnei Brak and you find a minyan. But at one point I said, okay, we'll try one more time. And I went with at that point, my son Moshe was bar mitzvah. I think my son Shmuel was bar mitzvah already. I think it was bar mitzvah. And I went looking for a minyan, and I found in one part of the park there was a Hasidic British family taking pictures, and they said and then I overheard them say, okay, let's take this last picture and then we'll daven mincha. I said, oh, great. So I said, can I join? I said, yeah, for sure. I said, you know, I'm Yahrzeit, so can I daven from it? He said, yes. And then one of these British fellows, you know, in the Queen's English said, what a wonderful, beautiful chag. By the way, I don't really know the Queen's English, so I don't know because we're here in the park, we took pictures, we have a minyan, and we even have a chiyuv, a chassan. And he felt bad, because if it was a chiyuv, that means someone died. So he apologized to me. I said, it's okay. I said, it was the 10th, 11th Yahrzeit. I forgot already, but I said, you know, at this point, I look at the Yahrzeit. I love my parents very much, but I look at the Yahrzeit as a day to thank HaKadosh Baruch Hu for such wonderful parents. And to really think about, depending whether it's Heyav or Yud Ches Tishrei, think about what I learned from my father and my mother. One of the things that I learned from my father, and I'm going to center the shir around stories today. One of the most important midos I learned from my father was to always be besimcha. And why do I say that? Because for some reason, I don't know why it is, people, you know, tell me Soloveichiks aren't happy. When they see me smile, they wonder, why am I smiling so much? So I said, I don't understand. I happen to be a very happy person. And not only am I a happy person, where did I learn to be happy? My father was a very happy person. And just you know, they say a story about a certain fellow went to see a psychologist 200 years ago, and he was very depressed, and he started to explain to the psychiatrist, you know, his problems. Oh, his problems, and the psychiatrist said, listen, I don't know if I can fix your problem, but I want to recommend to you to go to the circus. You go to the circus. There at the circus, the Gamil be the clown. At least you'll laugh for a few hours. It'll be fun. The guy cries and says, "Truth is, I can't go there because I am Garmidi the clown." So the people who walk around and they look very happy, they're really not happy. My father was a very happy person. As a matter of fact, maybe I'll reference the story a little bit later. One of the most beautiful pictures, which I don't know where it is, of my father, is a picture of my father. I'll explain to you what it was. I never had a picture. I saw a picture of my parents' house. My father, as you know, for the last part of his life, would always fly to New York from Tuesday and come back on Thursday. Now, I have to tell you, the first half of the year, I went with my father every Tuesday, every Thursday, and I would come back Thursday night. I would be exhausted, okay? My father would get off the plane, and he was ready for action. It was like unbelievable. But, later on, I know he always insisted, my mother told this to me, I'm taking a key of the house with him to New York. Why did he want the key? Because when he came home, he didn't want to ring the bell. He wanted to open the door himself and say out loud my mother's name and say, "Ella, I'm home." And he had the biggest smile on his face. Really, a very big smile. And it's easy to have a smile in Chicago. No, in April, May, June, July, August, September, October, November. Come December, January, February, and March, it's very difficult because it's freezing cold outside. And when my father would come in, he'd have the winter coat on, a scarf around his neck, and always have this big smile. And one of his grandchildren, I don't know who it was, once snapped a picture. And the picture was of my father smiling, coming up from the cold. Why? Because he was so happy to be home. So happy to be home. And my father enjoyed to laugh, and he was happy to enjoy life. I'll share you one story, and then I'll start giving you a little of his Torah over. But when I forgot how old I was, but as everyone who went to Brisk knows, I'm the baby in the family. Okay, and a baby in the family is a baby. So I tell myself I'm still a baby. And for the baby in the family, one of the most important days of the year is the birthday, Yom Kippur. And I used to have a chavrusa that year with someone in Yeshiva 10 to 12. I'm not going to say his name. And we learned from 10 to 12 per night. And every Yom Kippur night, I said, Yom Kippur's come, a little concerned. I want to go home. And I must have finished my chavrusa 11 o'clock. I went home. Being the baby in the family, I had this chus of being only living in the house at that point, my parents. And every time I'd come in, I'd go speak to my parents at night before, and my parents would be already in their bedroom. There was, any of the children, the grandchildren to remember that they had like some sort of a brown chair in the room. And I'd sit in the chair and talk to my parents. I'm sitting there talking to my parents, and all of a sudden the doorbell rings. And there's knocking at the door. And my mother goes, "Who is knocking so late at night after 11 o'clock? And I said, "I'll go check." And my father, in his usual self, says to me, "Chaim, be very careful. You never know who it might be, right? You never know." And the truth of the matter is, my father used to say that honestly, even though America then was not what America is today. Okay, they'd be more concerned about it. He sounded very nervous, very concerned. So I went downstairs. It's my friends. They came to make me a surprise birthday party. So I went to them and asked them, "Listen, it's very nice, but you really scared my parents." I said, "What do you scared your parents? Your parents knew we were coming. They put on a show for me." I walked upstairs to the bedroom, and they were laughing. It was so funny. Then my father says to me, "I am kept. Please bring me up some ice cream. I'll love ice cream also." Okay, so my father was a very, very happy person. Very happy person. And reason why I'm talking about happiness is because especially about living in Israel, this is man simcha for everybody, but it's actually can be quite challenging to be happy. Right? I'll share with you one story happened to me this week. Last Sunday night, I was checking Lovin the Strogim, someone's house, sells Lovin the Strogim. 7:30, my son Ahron, who's named after my father, obviously, calls me up and says, "You're taking my phone away in 40 minutes. I'm going to Gaza," right? So he said, "I'm going to speak to you next. You have to speak to me before you." I gave him a bracha. right? Talk a few minutes, and then I said goodbye, and then I called him back 5 minutes later. I said, I want to tell you one thing, very most important than anything else. I think my father said the same thing, by the way. I don't know. If you see anybody that might look like a terrorist, just shoot. Okay, that's very important. He said, don't worry. And that was it. And by the way, and I had a very hard time sleeping. I fell asleep. I woke up at 3 o'clock in the morning, and I think it was the combination of what he said to me, and then hearing about the terrible, terrible tragedy at the base in Binyamina. It's like it just it was. And so finally, at 4:30 in the morning, I tell people I have a sorrow for my father. If you're sleeping, you wake up. You can't fall up and sleep. You get up and you learn. I got up to learn. I say, how am I gonna be the simcha? And I have to listen to the tequila. How am I gonna do it? What am I gonna do? I learned, and then 6 o'clock in the morning, something changed, and I realized what was bothering me. What was bothering me? Because the truth is, all over the world, we all know we're living on the chesed of HaKadosh Baruch. But something that's very important is on Rosh Hashanah night, I read a letter to my kehillah that Rav Kook wrote to his son when his son Rav Tzvi Yehuda was learning in high school in Yerushalayim, and he asked him. He said, your mother and I want to know how you're doing. What time you get up in the morning? What do you eat for breakfast? You have friends who you're talking to. Time you go to bed at night. How close you are to the window. He just wanted. He wanted to live a normal life. It's all we want. The thing. All I want to do is talk to my sons, my kids, right? And I didn't. It says, did the army get you lulav and esrog? Because very important to have lulav and esrog. Do you sit in a sukkah? Are you having meals? Do you go ahead and get people to talk to? What's going on? That's all we want. So the truth is, he didn't call Erev Yom Tov. He didn't call Erev Shabbos. Baruch Hashem, last night he called me, right? And then he said to me, don't worry about me. Oh, great. Okay. That was done very well. But, by the way, he does have a little bit of, so there's a sukkah, and he is eating tuna fish. Okay? So, you're right? Yeah, okay. But the point I'm saying is that at that I remembered a very special time I had with my father, being the youngest. I remember that one of the more special times I had with my father was walking home from shul together, because I was the only one at home at a certain point, and therefore we would walk home together, and we'd have a chance to talk. What would we talk about? I don't remember anything we spoke about. Okay, I'll tell you what I do remember. I do remember that I think my father struck. I was 19 years old. If I remember correctly, 19 years old. And I do remember that we would come to Lincoln Avenue by Peterson and Peterson by Kedzie. My father I was 19 or 18, would grab my hand because my father didn't want me to cross the street by myself. Without him holding my hand. I would tell you, like, I'm embarrassed to say, it was kind of embarrassing. I would pull my hand away, right? But the truth is, it just showed the tremendous love that my father had for me. And then when my father had the stroke, and I was walking home from shul by myself every Friday night, going to the house, I missed it. You realize, and Mitzvah Hashem, I'll try to. I'm not just talking. I'll try to put it all together. So we're talking about simcha. Let's talk about simcha. And the question is, my father held actually that what is the mitzvah of simcha? I mean, we have to have mitzvah simcha beregel. The very important component of mitzvah simcha beregel is not stop just to eat meat and drink wine, whatever else it is. My father, I love the mice actually hold that ever makes you happy. It's actually okay. It's good. That's why he said it's not a problem to go ahead and to, on the Yom Tov meal. If milk makes you happy, you can have milk instead of the Yom Tov meal. But my father's point was that the real simcha is the simcha that you feel inside of you. And when you have this star korban, yain nesachim, or mizman hazeh, something else, it's really to show the simcha you have. But the basar is not the simcha, right? What's the real simcha is the feeling that you have, an inner feeling you have inside of you. And the point of this is to go ahead and to go ahead and show the simcha. And for that reason, he would say that's why there is simcha Yom Tov night also, even though Chazal tell us that the whole halacha of achilas basar and shtias yayin only starts only starts the first day of Pesach, not the first night. The first day of Sukkot is not the first night, and that's because you can't be mocked the korban. But that's in terms of achilas basar, but there definitely is a mitzvah of simcha, feeling simcha at when Yom Tov comes in, and the strongest raya is the fact that if someone is in a abelis of shiva or shloshim, Yom Tov comes in and negates that abelis. Shiva is over or shloshim is over. So it's definitely a difference of simcha. And another raya you brought, Gemara Pesachim. Gemara Pesachim says that if someone is shosim of asakas, someone pours all the arba kosas, brings it at once, yotza. So what are you yotze? So the Meforshim and the Daf say that Rashi look up, but you yotze mitzvah of simchas yontif. Simchas yontif, it's night, but there still is some sort of simchas yontif. It's just a sort of simcha at night. And what's important is you have to really go ahead and you have to feel the simcha. The question is what is the simcha do you feel? So number one, my father used to always say that simcha, realizing that you have the basic necessities in life. That is really the simcha that you have to have, and a person has to go ahead, and a person has to work on that to realize that he has what's needed. That's why on very famously, my father would say that Sukkot, the Simchas Beis Yeshuva. What are we going on celebrating? We're celebrating the fact that we're celebrating the fact that of Mayan, that we have the basic necessities of life. My father at other times would point out that what is simcha? Simcha is where you feel like you accomplished something, a question of sipuk. And I think that the simcha that my father felt was because he realized, even though the father was, as we all know, was very humble enough, he understood what he accomplished, whether it was in terms of the shum that he was giving, in terms of the fest he was doing, how he helped people, he understood. And that, in a certain sense, really brought him a sense of simcha, and that's what he would go ahead and that's what he would explain to people. He would explain to people how a lot of times we have vacuums in life, and all of a sudden we see something, and we have to latch onto that, so that will help us. That will be masameach. I still remember the story. I remember a lot of things. I remember that very beautiful story. That my father was a very early riser. Okay, a very early riser. In other words, now to have understanding it a bit, but I never knew what time my father got up in the morning. Okay? He always beat me up in the morning. I don't know. It was very rare, right? And there was one time where one of the we always had grandchildren in the house, and the whole house would be quiet and sleeping. My father would get up early in the morning, and as he was passing by one of the rooms, the door would be open. So one of my father's grandchildren would be in the crib, and he'd be up, very quiet. What a wonderful, wonderful baby, such a quiet baby. And then he'd see my father, and he'd hold out his hands to my father. And my father would, I'll never forget this, would quietly go into the room and take this baby boy out and take this baby boy downstairs. My father would, of course, have his cup of tea and his Gemara, and this little baby boy would sit on my father's lap the whole time while my father was learning. Very good. And so I obviously did not necessarily see boy holding his hand to my father. I was sleeping, but I used to see always every morning when I come down then that he was sitting on my father's lap every morning. And I remember 3 weeks later, there was someone in the house who was visiting, and this person had just gone through a divorce, and he was, he was living alone, and he was feeling very frustrated and very sad. And my father said to him, I want to tell you, he says, I also feel a vacuum in my life. And he told the story. For those 2 weeks, it was so wonderful for me, right? But we have to find other things that make us feel good about ourselves. And even the memories of those times that we had that make us feel good. So in other words, my father was able to experience life, and the good things in life helped would go ahead and help bring him simcha. And I think that was my father pointed out that the Rambam says in Hilchos Yontif that if someone goes ahead and someone has basar b'yayin, all sorts of food on his table, and he locks the doors and only his family is there, that's not simcha. That's presa. What's simcha's mitzvah? Simcha's mitzvah when you go ahead and you invite Almanos, Yesomim, Lolim, or that's a simcha. And simcha really, when you go ahead and you feel accomplished, when you go and you feel accomplished, that's a true simcha. That's simcha. The inner feeling that you've accomplished something. And I would go a step further and to say is that when we talk about the water being a simcha, it's the fact that you see HaKadosh Baruch Hu, you recognize HaKadosh Baruch Hu brought you the water. That is the simcha of the mind. It's not just you have water. You recognize where the water comes from. So we know that, especially in Eretz Yisrael, right? We know Pasuk says that it's not the Eretz Mitzrayim, and we have waters because of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So the simcha we're supposed to feel is the simcha when we're supposed to feel when we realize HaKadosh Baruch Hu's alive. It's the simcha of having accomplishments. My brother spoke about my father's chesed and sensitivity. So I'll share a story that I'm not sure if I said this here, and this is a story nobody knew until after my father passed away. I have a student. His name is Shimon Zlotnik. He made Aliyah, lives in Eretz Yisrael now. I know he was very involved in this war. And one time he came to Eretz Yisrael and he made a siyum on a Masechta, and he wanted me to come to the siyum. It was actually in the Shnas Eivel from my father, and it was towards the end of the 11 months. And he made it actually in the restaurant in Beit Shemesh. I went, and then I had to daven mincha. So we made a minyan there, and there was a lady there who said, "Are you Rabbi Soloveichik's son?" I said, "Yeah, I want to tell you a story that nobody knows." She said to me, "What happened?" He said, I was a madricha at Moshe, Wild Rose, Wisconsin, and your father would come. Came one Shabbos to be there. No, maybe he was a scholar residence at Shabbos. And Friday he was sitting, in the yard by the bunk where he was staying, learning the whole day. Okay? That's typical. And I was having a very difficult time with my chanichot. Very difficult time. They were impossible, these little girls. And my father noticed. And my father came over in Bush's room and said to me, I'm about to polish my shoes. The girls want me to polish your shoes also. And now, who wants Rabbi Soloveichik to polish your shoes? And all the girls stood up. And your father polished every girl's shoe. Okay? Now, they'll say to me, people say, how's that possible? How do you have polish all the shoes? Probably in those days, there was one color of shoes. That was black. All right? But can you imagine the sensitivity my father had? It's above and beyond. This is camp. He noticed that a 16-year-old son was suffering because the girls were listening to her, and he went and said that. But I think my father didn't talk about it. No one knew the story, but he understood he helped somebody, and that brought my father simcha. And I would just say that that I feel now that when I was walking home with my father, and he held my hand, he felt that there was a special relationship there, and that brought him simcha. When we talk about the water bringing him simcha, it wasn't just water. Everything in life he felt that we take for granted, right? He understood that it was that it brought him simcha. And I think that that this mitzvah of simcha is something which is very important, especially at times like this. I just want to share one last thought, and then I'll finish up. And I don't know if you've seen around, people are very much struggling with how to deal with Simchas Torah this year. Okay? On the other hand, Simchas Torah is Simchas Torah. And I remember my father used to always give speeches, Yisrael, B'Kutchabrichu, B'Yaraisa, Chadhu, right? That's what Shmini Atzeres is, and Simchas Torah is devoted to. Why? Because all the rest of Sukkot were machmer karbanos for all the Umas Olam. Come Shmini Atzeres, Parachad, Kepas Echad. It's a Parachad, Eilachad. I'm sorry. Why? Because just for the Jewish people, Baruch Hu says, I want one day just with you. It's devoted to recognizing our special relationship with Baruch Hu. That's why there's tremendous simcha. As a matter of fact, the dancing that we do, Simchas Torah night, my father always pointed out, is not because of Siyam HaTorah. It's because it's Yisrael v'Rais Dusha Brichu Kadu. That's the reason why. It's celebrating that. That's why in Chutz La'aretz, so my father followed Minhag Hagra, where he would go ahead and he would always do our kafas on Shmini Atzeres night, not Shmini Atzeres day, because Shmini Atzeres day is Simchas Torah day, because seeing the Torah. Shmini Atzeres, we're not Messiah the Torah, so he only had night, and it was very important to him. It was very important to him. Remember, there was 1 year, so he used to go to Skokie. But 1 year, as we know, when he stopped going to Skokie the first year, to the shul we davened, our Richard shul, they didn't have a cup of Shmini Atzeres night. So my father said, "Okay, we're going to Worcester Bikur Cholim." Okay, all right. I have to tell you, I never saw in my life. This Shmini Atzeres night, they started auctioning off Ata Haresa. Something must have lasted an hour and a half. It was great, all right. So the next year, my father, Father Richard, said, "Ask me a favor. We have our own compass. We have very quick compass." But it was very important to him. They said, Simchas Torah day? No, that's because it's the Torah. So they only doing Simchas Torah, but that was very important. We have to, it was very important to be Mesamech. And we realize how important the Simcha is. And I had a thought. I know it's going to sound a little odd that I'm going to say this, but there was the Baal Shem Tov said that the koach of Simcha, what you can accomplish with Simcha, is much more powerful than you accomplish with tears. And I was actually looking at the Netziv, and I thought that the Netziv implies that also, because if you look at the psukim that deal with in Parshas Emor and Parshas Pinchas, that deal with Yom Kippur and Sukkot, there's something very unique there. So we know that Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and Sukkot are b'chodesh Hashvi. And when it comes to Parshas Emor, when we discuss Rosh Hashanah, it says, "B'chodesh Hashiv echad lachodesh." When it comes to Yom Kippur, in Parshas Emor, it says, "Ach b'ashor lachodesh hashvi hazeh," as the word hazeh. When it comes to Sukkot, it says again, "B'chamisha shel yom lachodesh hashvi hazeh." Parshas Pinchas, when you mention Yom Kippur, chodesh hashvi hazeh, by Sukkot, it does not say hazeh in Parshas Pinchas. And the question is why. And the Sif explains very beautifully. He says, listen, Gemara says that any year where you're not Masriyan, you don't have a true beginning of the year, you're going to have to shout out at the end of the year, right? And it's the true is very, very important. True is very important. True is very, very important. What does that mean? That if you don't blow shofar on Rosh Hashanah, it's going to go ahead and affect everything that happens. For that reason, that Sif says when it comes to Yom Kippur, it says Ach Asur LaChodesh Shvi Hazeh. What's Hazeh? Same month as Chodesh Tishrei as Rosh Hashanah, because your Rosh Hashanah is going to affect the Yom Kippur. When it comes to Sukkot, the Parshas Emor, LaChodesh Shvi Hazeh, because your Rosh Hashanah is going to go ahead and affect your Sukkot. Parshas Pinchas, Yom Kippur, Chodesh Shvi Hazeh. Your Rosh Hashanah is going to affect your Yom Kippur. When it comes to Sukkot, it doesn't say in Parshas Pinchas. Why? It explains because in Parshas Pinchas, we're machab karbanos and sukkahs for the Shivim Umos. So what happens Rosh Hashanah does not affect the Shivim Umos. That's why it does not do Chodesh Hashvi Hazeh. The question is, you'll ask me, so what does that mean? He says, but Parshas Emor, the Sukkah, the Lulav, Yom Kippur, whatever Rosh Hashanah is like, is going to affect Sukkot and Yom Kippur. So what do? Right? We know that last year we didn't blow a true on the first of Rosh Hashanah. I feel lightly was not a great year. So, and we've had years before, by the way. Baruch Hashem, we didn't blow shofar, and we had very good years. So Netziv doesn't speak about this, but later on in the Parshas Emor, it says B'chodesh Hashvi again without the word Hazeh. It says Ach b'chamisha asher yom lachodesh hashvi'i. So there's another time where Sukkot will not be affected by Rosh Hashanah. When it speaks about the simcha you have when you gather in your harvest, with simcha about the chag, when you have simcha can override everything. Simcha can override everything. That's why it doesn't say in this pasuk hazeh, because when it comes to the mitzvah of simcha, of chag, of being chagigi, that by acting the proper way when it comes to chag and simcha, we can go ahead and we can overpower everything. That's why simcha is so important. So I think that I would just mention that this is what I believe. I believe that my father taught me that, and many times we spoke, okay, and about being samech bechelko, and doing what you're supposed to be doing. I never knew this, but my father was a Rebbe in Chaim Berlin. Rebbe in Chaim Berlin, right? The Chaim Berlin was the leaders of the yeshivas, right? And my father was very much, but never to miss a shir. So, in New York in the summer months, people leave. So the last few weeks, 1 year of one's man, how many students did he have in this year? Anybody know? He had three. He had three. He had three at Ravana Lichtenstein. And Ravana Lichtenstein, by the way, was super impressed. He was super impressed that my father would travel on I guess it was the A train. I'm not even sure. An hour and a half to give shir to three people. But I don't think my father even realized that it was a challenge, right? There were three people there that wanted to learn, and he was besimcha with it. And that simcha of taking experience of life is so important. And that was really a very strong part of my father's life. And I think if we learn from that, of always being besimcha, so Mitzvah Hashem, we be able to overpower everything down in front of us, then should see to us for the comments. Thank you.
Shukach, thank you. Baruch Kalman, who's over there in Harnof, and you see his name on the screen over there. He invited Rav Moshe Kletenik of Seattle, who is also a Talmud of Rav Ahron, to also speak today. I remember a story that Rabbi Kletenik's brother told at Brisk in Chicago during the Shloshim for Rav Ahron. I'm not going to say it now to not take anything away that Rabbi Kletenik might say, but I want to thank Baruch for organizing this and for inviting Rabbi Kletenik, and also for he, along with Murray Goldenhirsch, for arranging things in Harnof. So let me just move the windows over here, and thank you in Harnof, and Rabbi Kletenik. The floor is yours.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity for reflection and to express Hakaras Hatov. Hakaras Hatov to a Rebbe, but not only a Rebbe Mufak, a role model in terms of how to deal with so many situations in life, a role model in Midos, and somebody who not only through the Torah that I had the privilege of learning from the Rosh Yeshiva, but also experiencing how he lived his life, has had a tremendous impact on my professional life and on my personal life. And I would like to use as a framework for my remarks this morning a Gemara in Brachos, Daf Chavches Amid Beis, the way I heard it interpreted by the Rosh Yeshiva. And the Gemara says, "Ukeshachala Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai nichnusu talmidav levakro." When Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai fell ill, his students entered to visit him. As soon as he saw them, he began to cry. Omer lo talmidav, his talmidim said to him, Ner Yisrael amud hayamini patish achazak, mipnei ma ata boche. You, who are the lamp of Israel, the right-handed pillar, the mighty hammer, why do you cry? Amar lahem, he said to them, Elohim machnisim osi lifnei melech basar adam shahayom kana lemocher bakever. If they would be bringing me before a king of flesh and blood who is here today and tomorrow, he is in the grave. V'im kolis alai ein kasolam v'im osireni ein asiraso Isur Olam v'imis Hiseni ein misaso misol Olam. If he would become angry, his anger is not eternal. And if he imprisons me, it's not internal. And if he takes my life, it's not internal. V'ani yochol l'faiso b'dvorim l'chashto b'mamo. Afal pikein ha'yisi bocha. I could appease him with words, or I could bribe him with money, and yet I would cry. They're taking me before HaKadosh Baruch Hu, who is eternal. Kaso kasolam v'im b'sisein misasa musacholam v'yavosrein musacholam v'yavosrein musacholam and v'eini yochol l'faiso b'dvorim l'chashto b'mamon v'lo'od. Not only that, there are two paths. There are chachas l'ganedam, but there are chachas l'gehinom. A very powerful Gemara. And the Rosh Yeshiva interpreted it as follows. Ner Yisrael means the one who brings the light of Torah to Yisrael. And I have to say, Baruch Hashem, I had the privilege of learning many years, hearing many shiurim from the Rosh Yeshiva. And during the course of my professional life, I have had the privilege of encountering many Gedolei Yisrael, and talking to them in Torah. I spent 5 years in Miami Beach. Every year, Gedolim would come. There were some who remained for the entire winter, and I was a Benal of the Mesivta Stender next to me. I would have the privilege of having Gedolim stay there and speak to them afterwards. Others came to raise money. When I was president of the RCA, I met many Gedolei Yisrael and chief rabbis and all this. And throughout many, many years, I had the privilege and opportunity to speak to many Gedolei Yisrael. And I always seized the opportunity to speak in learning. Often they would prompt me, ask me something. But I have to say this was singular and unique about the Rosh Yeshiva. The ability that any sugya in Shas that I might open up, the clarity and the mastery of the Rishonim, as if he had just looked at it 5 minutes ago, and when necessary, Lasuke Shemaitza, Aliva de Hilchasa, that was something which was truly unique. And then something else. I have to thank the Rosh Yeshiva for teaching the art of Horah and Psak Halacha. And it is an art. Of course, one has to know the Makoros. But in order to paskin Halacha, you have to understand the circumstances. You have to understand the person within their circumstances. And there is a chush that one has or can learn if it's properly taught. There are circumstances where you know that, of course, always based on the Makoros, you have to find the Kula, other times not. And besides hearing many shiurim from the Rosh Yeshiva and speaking to him about many, many practical shaylas halacha, whether in Rabbanus, whether in other areas there. And then I had the additional privilege. Rav Moshe was my chavrusa, and Rav Moshe was a very, very dear friend to myself and to my brother. For many, many years, he still is, but distance has kept us apart. I had the really joy getting together a few months ago when I visited Chicago. We had a chance to catch up. But through that, I had the privilege of being in the home of the Rosh Yeshiva And I had the opportunities. Often it was things I had heard shiurim, but then I could prompt and have Maisa Rav and have it actually halacha v'maisa, but also to hear the Rosh Yeshiva field questions in real time and how they were handled. And Baruch Hashem, I mean, I've had many experiences in life. Many people don't know this, but for over 30 years, I was designated by Rabbi Dr. Abraham Twersky as his posek, and I got shilos halacha from everywhere, any community, Hasidic, Haredi, modern Orthodox, people with any type of addiction that exists in the world who were trying to come out of it and still maintain halacha and Shabbos and kashrus and Yom Kippur, Pesach. But the point is, the ability to understand the person within their circumstances and understand where they are, that hush can only be taught from a real Godol b'Yisrael who can teach Torah. And I remember the RCA, I was the chair. I was on the Smichas Standards Committee, the chair of Smichas Committee. There were smicha programs online that had tremendous curriculum. But we said, no way. We can't approve that because Torah can only be taught from a Rebbe to a Talmud. And a Gadol, like the Rosh Yeshiva, is able to teach it. But he can bind the tremendous Ner Yisrael, that knowledge of Torah and how to apply it and understanding people in their circumstances with unmatched anava. Many times after a shir, I would approach Rosh Yeshiva and have questions, and he was walking back to his apartment. He always had a huge pile of svarim that he had used during the shir. And I would always ask him, please, Rabbi, can I take some? Can I hold? No. Invariably, he refused. Now, he could have a Talmud, there would be no shayla if a Talmud would carry the Sforim, all of them or any of them. But he invariably refused. And his anava was just unmatched. And I'll come back to that a little bit later. So Ner Yisrael, but Amud HaYemini. So the Rosh Yeshiva said, the right-handed pillar upon whom people can lean. And Brisk is not only renowned for its Torah, but also for its chesed. And as a sign of Brisk, as we've heard from Moshe, we've heard from Chaim, the Rosh Yeshiva was a tremendous Baal Chesed. Before there was a story mentioned, I probably know what story my brother shared. It was probably a story of what happened while we were sitting Shiva for
on Friday afternoon.
Shabbos. And it
that's the story.
was an Erev Shabbos, and the Rosh Yeshiva came to be a Menachem Aval. And by the way, I have to say that throughout that entire event, when our father was in the hospital, the Rosh Yeshiva was there at the time of Ptira, and he took it upon himself to make all the arrangements for the Levaya, to then arrange for the Kever, to even arrange for the Matseva, and he wrote a beautiful, beautiful inscription for my father, who was an Alter Mira. But anyway, he was there for everything. But he was a Menachem Aval, and it was an Erev Shabbos. And my brother and I just raised the shayla. We had just had all of our shirts had been washed and cleaned. It was Erev Shabbos. So he said, no. I will put that on. I said, no, Rebbe, please, no. And he marched into our bedroom. He said, where are the shirts? And he pulled off his own shirt, and he took a few shirts of my brother's. He put it on for a little bit, and then he took mine, and he said, okay, now you can wear them. But that shows his chesed and his anova. And just another story, which I don't know how many people know of. This is not a personal one, but one that I was told. It was came in for a chassan in New York. Actually, Rav Moshe arranged. When Rav Ahron took over as the Rabbi Masher of Strites, he kept on as a shutaf, a Rav. And actually, that Rav picked me up at the airport. And then he said, "Do you know who Rav Ahron is?" I said, "He's my Rebbe, my Yeshiva." "No, but do you know who Rav Ahron is?" And he proceeded to tell me this story. He said, once we were in Strites, and there was looking out through a basement window. So Rav Ahron saw an elderly Jew who was carrying 2 bags. Rav Ahron darted out into the street. He ran over to that Jew and he said, "Let me help you." The person refused. "Please, please, let me help you. Let me help you." No. So then he said, Ahron said to that Jew, "Where are you going?" "Oh, I'm going to Borough Park." Said, "Oh, I'm going to Borough Park with a taxi. Wait 1 minute. And you can come with me." And Rosh Hashiva went and he called the taxi. He rode with the Jew into Brooklyn, rode back because he couldn't bear the sight of a Jew who he thought was experiencing difficulty and would not intervene. And it's legendary. Many of the stories have been written up, others not. Many have been shared. I will just suffice this for me, it's morning. Everybody else is probably afternoon or evening. I'm on the West Coast here. And then Hatish HaChazak, the mighty hammer. The mighty hammer. And as the Rosh Hashiva said, on the one hand, it says, Kol Talmud Chacham she'eino kosher kabarzel eino Talmud Chacham. Any Talmud Chacham who isn't as hard as iron is not a Talmud Chacham. But on the other hand, a person has to be able to be soft, to be pliable. And he said, if it's a matter of principle, then a Talmud Chacham has to be kosher kabarza. But if it is in other areas and other matters or personal interactions, then a person has to be Rach Kekana. And the midos and the anova and the chesed and the concern were always there. But when it came to matters of principle, and we all know occasions where standing on principle was something that was not easy, and it could threaten parnasa or it could threaten other things, but that didn't matter to the Rosh Hashiva. Because if it was a matter of principle, it was a matter of halacha, it was a matter of Torah, then the Hatish HaChazak, the mighty hammer, did whatever had to be done, regardless of what may be the results and the consequences in terms of personal life. And there were occasions, whether it was in professional life or when I was the president of the RCA, where people pushed me to do things that I thought were incorrect. And people told me, so-and-so will occur if you such and such will occur if you do this. I had a role model to guide me and to look at, and who could say, there are times when you can be Rach Kekana, but there are times when you have to be kosher kavarzel and you have to disregard what may be the collateral damage that may occur. And as I said to one of my friends who told me, if you do this, such and such will happen, after following what I had seen from my Rebbe, my mentor, if I can't do such and such, what is this position worth anyway, if I can't do what is the right thing? So the Rosh Yeshiva was Ner Yisrael, a tremendous Gadol B'Torah, a tremendous Bal Horah, a Amud HaYamini that many people leaned on when they were in need, and the Patish HaChazak, who never hesitated to do what was right, and remembering him should give us all chizuk for those occasions in life as they arise, whether it's an opportunity to help someone in need, whether it is a challenge, whether it is something which is important for community of Klal Yisrael, how we should act. And I want to wish everybody a good Moed, and thank you for the opportunity to share some thoughts.
Thank you, Rabbi Kletenik. What you said about the Bal Hara reminds me of something that a friend of mine said, that his Rosh Hashiva, who was, well, I would say the connection, but a connection to Rav Aharon. When Rav Aharon was nifter, so the Rosh Hashiva said that he had a certain shot. He asked Rav Aharon a certain question, he got an immediate answer, and it was about a get. And he said, "Well, I'm not just asking; it's lamaisa." And Rav Aharon then immediately wrote a long tshuva with that answer. And this Rosh Hashiva told this over to his yeshiva when Rav Aharon was nifter. So thank you, Rabbi Kletenik, for your words. And again, I want to thank Rav Moshe and Rav Chaim and Baruch Kalman for organizing a lot of this, and for Murray Goldenhirsch for hosting in Harnof. And the stories and the Torah of Rav Aharon, as Rabbi Kletenik just mentioned, it should inspire us. And as Rav Aharon himself said in the Hesped for Rav Yashaber, that Reb Chaim Volozhiner said that there was a Gemara that when the Beis Hamikdash the fire overtook the Beis Hamikdash, the Pirchei Kahuna threw up the keys, and a fire that looked like a hand came down and took the keys. And Rav Aharon said, "Do not," to the Talmidim of Reb Yashaber, that he quoted in the name of Reb Chaim Volozhiner, that the Pirchei Kahuna did a grave mistake, because the keys, we have to keep the keys. So he's told the Talmidim of Reb Yashaber to keep the keys of the teachings of Rav Yashaber and use them. So we here in this gathering, and that's one of the reasons I had a chutzpah to read from Rav Aharon had wrote for the Manhattan School for the Retarded Children, to show that we have other writings and teachings from Rav Aharon to continue to inspire us, and we are keeping the keys. And Hashem should allow us to continue to teach the Torah of Rav Aharon, and it should continue to inspire us and guide us. And not just the Torah of Rav Aharon, but the lessons of Rav Aharon to treat people the way that he would treat them and help people who needed to be helped. So good Moed, everyone. Chag Sameach, and we'll be on the lookout for the email. Mir Tashem will have share next Sunday.